Hello and welcome to the Alnwick Castle podcast. I'm Deborah Beecroft.
And I'm Daniel Watkins.
And today's podcast sees us return to the world of medieval archery as we are joined for a second time by the highly skilled Andy Rice to talk more about this key part of Alnwick Castle's history, including the role that the bow played in the Wars of the Roses.
If you haven't heard our first episode with Andy, check out episode 49 in our podcast archive, and to hear our most recent conversation, recorded in front of a live audience in the Artisans Courtyard of Alnwick Castle, keep listening and please enjoy. So we are here in Artisans Courtyard with Master Longbowman Andy Rice. Welcome back to the Alnwick Castle podcast, Andy. How are you today?
Thank you very much indeed, Darren. Yeah, absolutely fine. It's been a bit of a cold day and we've had a bit of miserable weather the last couple of days, but we've had plenty of good people coming through and plenty of good questions, so quite happy with it.
Well, speaking of good questions, we'll get started hopefully with some here. Last time you were on the podcast, we talked in general about archery, but this time we thought we'd go into a little bit more detail. If we can start with the bow. My first question really is, how was a bow, like the one you're holding here, a traditional medieval bow, made?
Right, well, bows are traditionally made, of course. This is a wood bow, and it's traditionally made from a single stave of wood. That stave will have been imported. It will have been imported from Italy or Spain. When it was done so, the reason why we did that is because we need nice straight grain on the actual wood itself, in the wood. Anything that's grown above 3,000 metres in nice dry conditions is what we're looking at. Why we don't use English yew, because primarily we use yew for war bows, why we don't use English yew is because it's too damp. We can make a bow from it, but to get the strength of a war bow, that you're talking about 120 to 180 pounds draw weight, you need nice straight grains and nice strong bones. And in fact, actually, there was a tax put on tons of wine that was brought into England. And for every, I think it was about for every ton of wine, you had to bring in 2 or 3 bow staves. Richard III, much maligned later on, of course, actually increased that to 10 bow staves per ton of wine. So you can see how important it becomes. Making the bow, a bow such as this, sorry Daniel, I'm nearly hitting you with it. A bow like this would be made using the heartwood and the sapwood, a cross section through your tree. So if you take the bark off, what you get underneath that is the sapwood. And then you'll look, there'll be the creamy sapwood, and then there'll be a division and a darker heartwood. And that's what you use to make your bow. Because you use the heartwood to the back and use the sapwood to the front, and they form a natural spring against each other. So when you're making your bow, you're shaving it out of a stave. That's fine. That's no problem. Anybody can do that. The key is tillering your bow. Now, tillering is essentially teaching your bow to bend, teaching this piece of wood to bend, because they tend not to be too flexible. But you gradually teach it to bend. And if a bowyer is doing this, what a bowyer does is he goes along, he puts it on a couple of pegs, and he's got to draw a weight. And he pulls the weight on the string. And that means the bow is bending slowly. And what he's watching for is any change in that bow. And he'll go along and he knows what he's looking for. He's looking for any stress points, and he'll shave a bit off that bit, and he'll shave a bit off that bit, then he'll do it again, and he'll keep doing it until he's happy with the draw weight that he gets. Now, when you bear in mind, as I said, a war bow is 120 up to 100, well, anywhere between 80 to 180 pound draw weights. That kind of draw weight, you're going to be working that for a little while. But believe it or not, a good bowyer could turn out a bow in probably about a day. So they were very, very efficient at it. So that's how you make your bow.
Fantastic. So we have our bow. What about the arrow? What are the components of an arrow during this time, during the 14th, 15th centuries?
Right. Well, basically, you have various different elements to it, of course. You've got the shaft itself. Now, the shaft itself, we tend to use parallel shafts just because they're easier to get. But shafts could be paralleled. They could actually be tapered. They could also be barreled, which means they're thicker in the centre. They could also be footed, which means you splice in a harder piece of wood at the actual tip of the arrow and makes it more of a power hitting something. It makes it heavy hitting. Now, These shafts would have been taken, they're usually ash, but aspen is also used as well. Now, there's a guy who wrote the book, Toxophilus, who was Roger Ascham, and he likes aspen quite a lot, but he also likes ash.
So different kind of wood for an arrow than a bow?
Yes, yeah, because for a very, very good reason. Why does an arrow fly straight out of a bow? Out of these bows, you have to bend round the handle. If you don't have the right strength in your arrow, if you don't have what's called spine in your arrow, what happens is it just flies off one way or the other. It won't go straight. Arrows, when you loose them, actually bend round the handle and then go. It happens so quickly you can't see it. But if you slow it down in stroboscopes and using that, you'll actually see it do it. And it flexes quite a lot. It's surprising how much it does flex. But you need the correct spine. And ash is a good one for spining. So they will actually, that's one of the reasons why they used it. So was aspen. Okay. So that's why they used it. So the other part of it, of course, you would have the tip, which is made by the arrowsmith. Not a blacksmith, an arrowsmith. Somebody who specialises in arrowheads. Yeah? But you also have got, of course, the fletcher. Now, the fletcher is the person who does the shaft itself, but also puts the feathers on. And that matters, because your feathers, if I look at that one, actually you can see that quite well on that one. If you look at that, you can actually see they all turn one way. Your fletchings all go one way. You never use a right wing and a left wing mixed together of feathers. You always have left wing full or right wing full, because it has to spin. And that's what makes your arrow spin. If you had the other side, if you had left and right together, mixed up, that would, essentially, it would just drop. And I see a gentleman shaking his head there. You've heard about this, haven't you? Yeah? The famous Kevin Costner film that was shot here, of course, part of it.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Of course, Robin is sitting on the battlements. He takes the arrow and he takes the fletchings out with his teeth and then shoots them. What would happen in reality with that is it would just drop. Wouldn't do anything at all. You have to have the stabilisation, so it would drop.
And how different could arrows be? I can see you've got a display on our table here in the courtyard of lots of arrows that look pretty different to each other.
Yeah, they had various different functions. The most common head you would see would be your bodkin head. That, we believe, is armour piercing, but one of the tricks that the English archery had was to place their archers on the flanks of an army, not just in the front. Placing your archers on the flanks means that they actually fly inwards, which means that if you're hitting men coming towards you and horses, etc., you've got a bigger target. You've also got more vulnerable areas. One of the things that is a pet bugbear of me and a few other people is when they do penetrating armour testing, they always try and do it from the front. No point, because armour, though, tapers round the sides. So they're going to be more vulnerable. So if it's 2 or 3 mil here, it's going to be around about 1.5 here. So it's thinner. And you've also got gaps where you can get into. And that's where you're going to shoot for. Yeah, they're the vulnerable areas. Mail, of course, was also worn by men with armour. And I actually have got here, I have a needle bodkin, which is a longer version of the shorter bodkin. Short bodkins are kind of stubby. These ones are much longer. And as the name suggests, they are needles. The idea behind them is to go through mail. Because men who wore plate armour, what they would do, where you've got vulnerable bits, you've got a plate armour on your forearm, plate armour on this arm, towards your wrist. In between that, the elbow, you've got chainmail, or should be mail, shall we say. Now, underneath that is a gambazon. But you have vulnerable parts. So what you're looking for is to shoot at the mail. So one of the things you try and do is go through the mail links. And once you do, you break through them. And you literally draw the links into the wound. Also as well, English archers were a little bit sneaky. Because what they do is put their arrows in the ground before they shoot them. Useful for picking them up, but also great because you get contamination on the end of them.
That is sneaky.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
But it wins the battle, which is
I
what
suppose it does. And speaking of battles, this year at the castle, we're looking a lot at the Wars of the Roses. We have a new exhibition, we have a new book out. How was archery used during the Wars of the Roses?
Well, archery during the Wars of the Roses, it's actually changed quite a lot, because during the 100 Years' War, you are looking at fighting against armoured men. You're looking at mismatching. So you've got the French on one side, generally. They don't tend to have bowmen. They had crossbowmen, which were Genoese crossbowmen that were mercenaries usually. But generally speaking, you're talking about going against noblemen who have got armour, some of men at arms, etc. So you're trying to defeat that all the time. However, you get into the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses is not against a nation. It's against each other. You're talking about a civil war. So essentially what you've got the Yorkists on one side, you've got the Lancastrians on the other. But that's not as easy as that, because every part of the country vied for whoever they wanted. So all these different families declared for whoever. But that changes things, because the king is no longer paying for things. If you want archers, you're paying for them. So it changed how things worked. And it changed it also in the way of the battlefields, because for the first time, Englishmen met Englishmen at the battlefield. And both sides had longbows. Both sides had bows. So they kind of cancelled each other out. And this is where you get these massive archery duels before the likes of Bosworth and Tewkesbury and places like that. And the idea behind them wasn't so much to do what they did in the 100 Years' War, to take out targets. It was designed to prick your enemy to come to you, to abandon their defensive position and come to you. And that's what they were there for. Of course, notably, the Battle of Towton. Now, that was a serious battle. Palm Sunday, 1461. Bitterly cold day, absolutely freezing cold. Both sides met at a place called Towton, which is still, if you go to the battlefield, that battlefield still exists, very similar to what it was then. It's not changed a lot. They're standing there, they're freezing cold, the snow's coming down. The Lancastrians were shooting against the wind. The Yorkists were shooting with the wind. That makes a difference. The Lancastrians shot, they had a big archery duel. The Lancastrians shot. The Lancastrian archers didn't quite make the mark. Their arrows fell short. Some of them would have found the mark, obviously, but a lot of them fell short. The Yorkist archers, when they shot, they actually went the full distance because they had the whole of the wind behind them. But crucially, at the Battle of Towton, just to give you an idea what the sort of distance and the sort of amount you're talking about, those archers shot in 10 minutes, the Yorkist archers shot 750,000 arrows. Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that entirely. That is something like 1,200 and something arrows per minute. It is a huge amount. We can tell from the actual conservative estimate of the dead is around about 28,000, which was a figure that was unequaled until the First World War. But we don't know the exact numbers of the sides because the records weren't kept. And of course, these were families that were all coming together. So if you had 4 or 5 families that were all for Edward, Duke of York, then that's where they went, if they were the same for the Lancastrian side. So we don't know quite how many were there. And of course, each family was raising that, which is where you come in with the bows, because each family is raising its own levies. And those levied archers, they're a bit different, because those levied archers are not going to have the same amount of armour that normal people do. In the 100 Years' War, you had noblemen, men at arms, etc., that had quite a lot of armour. Different in a civil war, because those people are levied, they're being brought up, and they will have what Grandad gave them. They'll have what they can get, what they can scrounge. So they may have bits of armour, but not the whole thing. They may have some plate armour on the leg. They may have a brigandine, but they'll have a helmet. But that's about it. They may have other bits of armour. So what we did was we changed how we actually used our arrows. We changed it. We went back to using our bodkin points, but we changed them slightly. We use this. It's cheaper. There is an arrow that's there, that's a Type 16, that appeared around about 1415 in the World 100 Years' War. The idea behind it was made of steel to try and defeat armour. But when you get into the Wars of the Roses, we don't want that because it's expensive. Steel is really expensive to make. So we dropped that out because we don't need it. What we need is a general purpose arrow that will pretty much take everything. And what you get is a bodkin point like that, but it's actually steeled on the edges. It's not made of steel, it's made of iron. But you steel it, and it's called case hardening. Now, oddly enough, there is no actual evidence of them doing that. But we know they could do it. And we know that if they could do it, they would. It's as simple as that. It's a cheap alternative to your very expensive arrowheads. And if you were in somewhere like this, and you were levying your archers, etc., that's what you'd be doing. You'd be looking at the cost.
Which the Percys very much did, because they were very involved in this. They were at the Battle of Towton. We know there was some of the casualties in this bloodiest day in English military history. We don't know exact numbers of archers. Do we know whether the Yorkists or the Lancastrians, generally speaking, had the better archers? Did one side have any advantage?
Well, again, this is where it cancels each other out. This is very strange, because both sides had the archers, etc. In fact, actually, the Battle of Towton, it looked as if the Yorkists were going to lose. It was the fact that Edward was actually backed up at the end of the battle. He actually had more support coming in that actually changed that battle around, and it was Edward that won. Was that down to his archers? Probably not. It was more down to the fact he just had more support. He had reinforcements coming where the Lancastrians didn't. The Lancastrians broke, and that was the end of that. Towards that. But of course it wasn't the end of the battles, of course.
No.
Sadly.
No.
It wasn't.
And an arrow wasn't always the end of you. It wasn't always fatal. So with that in mind, should we get a little bit gory and grisly and do some stuff about medieval surgery?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, okay.
Why not?
So can we talk about what happened to another Percy, Harry Hotspur, and his rival, the Prince of Wales, at the Battle of Shrewsbury?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting little tale, actually, because the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403 is actually essentially the tale of two Henrys. You've got Harry Hotspur, who is astride that horse out there in the courtyard, and he is very famous. He was named Hotspur by the Scots for his hot temper, and he's named by Shakespeare, of course. You have him who's leading the forces of Owen Glendower. He's in rebellion against Henry IV, the young Prince Hal's dad. Young Prince Hal is on the other side fighting for his dad. So now you've got Harry Hotspur. He gets shot in the face by an arrow. Full force shot, killed straight away, almost instantly.
No chance of survival with an arrow like that.
No chance of survival. It would have been what they call a through and through. It would have literally come straight in and more or less out the other side. So it would have done the job quite nicely. That's the end of him. However, the same battle, you have Prince Hal here, with his arrow sticking out his face, because he also got shot by an arrow.
And we should say at this point, for the purposes of the audio, that you do have a model of Prince Hal's head with an arrow sticking out of it.
I do indeed, yes. That we use for purposes of demonstration. He gets shot in the face by an arrow. We know that it was a different type of actual arrow, or different type of shot, shall we say, than Henry Percy got. The difference is that it was a deflected shot. It wasn't a full shot. It was deflected off somebody's helmet, we believe. It glanced off, but it still had enough force when it entered his face to just go below his eye, and it went underneath into his eye, and it went 6 inches in. That shaft went 6 inches in, yeah? So it's a long way in. So, believe it or not, 16-year-old lad, he carried on fighting for half an hour. After that, he gets injured, carries on fighting for half an hour. Now, we don't know if he actually removed the shaft or whether a surgeon did. We don't know. Somebody at some point did. Problem is, that shaft has got a push-fit head on it. So when that comes off, either that or there was a little bit of wax holding it on. The wax softens in the body because of the heat of the body. And literally the shaft came straight out.
Is that why you would have wax on there for that purpose, or is wax just part of the arrow making procedure?
Now that's interesting.
Anyway?
Yeah, wax would have been used for that, to actually help glue that on. But also as well, there is an experiment that was done about actually waxing shafts. And if you wax the shafts, it makes them go through things better. So there's a possibility they did that as well. But that's a separate interesting point. But
okay.
It's an interesting point. So he takes the shaft out. And he's obviously, about half an hour later, he's dragged off to Kenilworth Castle, which is the nearest royal residence. The people there, the barber surgeons there, couldn't do anything for him. So the only thing they could do was call on a guy called John Bradmore. Now, John Bradmore, he was actually the royal family surgeon. So they'd get him to come, a couple of days, obviously, because he's got to get to Kenilworth. He goes in, And the problem that he's had, of course, no pressure here. This is just a constitutional crisis. This is the heir to the throne. No pressure on John. So he walks in the door and has a look. And what he realises is the wound has started to close over. That gives him a problem because he needs to open it. And what he does, he creates what he calls little tents, which I'm just moving across onto where the model is. These little tents were made of alder, the pith of alder, which has antiseptic qualities anyway. He wraps and stitches in linen, clean linen, and he dips that in honey. Now, honey is a natural antiseptic. As we know, we still use honey today in certain bandages. So in the wound, he starts putting these into the wound, puts it in the wound in the face, and he leaves it. Day or so later, comes back, takes that out, changes it, puts a slightly larger one, slightly longer one in. And he keeps doing that over and over again until he opens the wound. But that gives him a problem, because once he's got the wound open, how do you get the arrowhead out? You can't get a pair of forceps in. You can't drive the arrow through, because the arrow has gone, actually the arrowhead is close to the guy's spine.
So you can't leave it in there either?
You can't leave it in there either. So it really is a very difficult situation. But John is a very clever guy. John is also a metallurgist. He also knows about metals and things like that, and he knows his tools. He knows what he's doing. So he makes his own tool. He gets basically, essentially, he sketches a tool and goes to a blacksmith and says, "Can you make this?" The blacksmith says, "Yes, I can make it." So he goes in, and he essentially, when you look at it, changes a pair of forceps from going downwards to outwards. So what he does, his tool had a worm screw on it. This is a hand-driven version, but
you've got one here.
I actually have one here, but you can see there, if you're watching it, you can see it opens outwards. It doesn't open inwards. So that locates, and what he does, he goes into the wound. Now bear in mind, there's no scanners, there's no CT scans, there's no x-rays, there's nothing, you can't see anything.
And no anaesthetic either.
No, I'll come to that in a minute.
Okay.
There was some anaesthetic, but I'll come to that in a moment. He's going into the guy's face with this instrument. Now at this point, he is working blind. Literally working blind. He goes in far enough and he says, "By the grace of God and my imagination, I feel it locate." This is your surgeon speaking. Now, he's located it. And what he says, what he's thinking is that he has actually located the tool in the back of the arrowhead, actually in the socket of the arrowhead. Now what he does, he turns his worm screw. I use my hands just to press the two things together. And the jaws on either side of these new forceps that he's got grip the inside diameter, not the outside, the inside. And he gives it a wiggle, which would have hurt, and then he pulls it out. Now it pulls out as one piece, so he's got the whole arrowhead out. That, of course, gives you a bit more of a problem because you've got a wound. By the way, he actually got his name on this. It's actually called the Bradmore Arrow Extractor.
Okay.
So he got his name on it.
Yeah.
So he's now in that position. He's got a wound. What is he going to do with it? Well, he cleans it out. He uses white wine, vinegar, and other different elements like rosewater and stuff like that. And the idea is to clean it out, make it as clean as he can. Then he starts wound packing it. And we use wound packing even today. A year or so ago, there was a nurse that was here, and she'd actually done this 2 days before I was speaking about it here.
Okay, so good method.
Yeah, it's not changed really, apart from the fact we use much more sterilised stuff.
Yes.
He's wound packing, so he puts strips of linen in, clean linen, he soaks that in honey, and he soaks it with, and he uses flour as well, and various different herbs. And the idea is to actually take fluid from the wound, to absorb it into the wound dressing, into the wound packing that he's put in. Now he's doing this day by day. So what he's doing is, he's coming in, taking the wound packing out, cleans it out again, wound packs again, and he does it day after day after day. And he leaves these tents in again to help keep that wound open as he's doing it, so that it heals the right way. So each time he's doing this, he uses smaller and smaller tents until finally the wound, because wounds actually go from the bottom upwards, the knit, he finally gets to a point he's happy with it. There's no infection, he's quite happy with that. And then he stitches the wound shut, and he uses beeswax across his thread to do so that it keeps it clean. So Prince Hal was extremely lucky because, of course, Prince Hal survived that and ends up, when his dad died, as Henry V of England, of Agincourt fame. It also was lucky for Mr. Bradmore as well, because Mr. Bradmore, one, he got a gratuity from a very grateful king of 10 marks a year, which is about £4,000 in our money.
Not bad.
Which is not bad. He got to retire, basically, and write his books and things like that. But it also saved his bacon in another way.
Okay.
Well, they knew exactly where he was to get him to Kenilworth, because he was actually being charged with counterfeiting his own money.
Oh.
So all the charges got dropped.
Ah. Good for him.
Good for him, yeah, for a very grateful king. Yeah. So there you go.
So you dropped a hint about anaesthetic there.
I did indeed, yes. Anaesthetics. The actual anaesthetic is called Dwala. And Dwala actually comes from the Middle East. It came along with the Crusades. Of course, a lot of Middle Eastern medicine crossed over, so we get that. Now, the earlier recipes were never written down because barber surgeons were famously jealous of each other, and they wouldn't tell each other things and all that kind of thing. But later on, things changed. In the Wars of the Roses, you get to write these things down a bit more. And you can actually see there is, on my sheet there, a thing that says, how to make a drink that men call Dwala. If you want to read them out.
Take 3 spoonfuls of the gall of a barrow.
Yep.
Swine for a man, and for a woman of a gilt. 3 spoonfuls of hemlock juice.
Which is a poison, of course, if you get it wrong.
3 spoonfuls of wild neep.
Indeed.
3 spoonfuls of lettuce.
Now, lettuce is a strange one, but lettuce, if you boil it up and have the juice, actually helps put you to sleep.
3 spoonfuls of pape.
Pape, which is
Pape,
opium. Opium. Again, make sure you get the right dosages.
Yep. 3 spoonfuls of henbane.
Yes, indeed. Poison again.
3 spoonfuls of azel.
Which is vinegar.
Vinegar.
Easel. Yep.
Mix them all together and boil them a little, and put them in a glass vessel well stopped, and put thereof 3 spoonfuls into a pottle of good wine, and mix it well together.
There you go. So you got it in wine, so it at least tasted not too bad. But interesting vinegar. Now, vinegar is a strange one. Why vinegar? Vinegar, oddly, helps to bring people back up. So the idea was the anaesthetic would bring you down, but vinegar would take you to a level. And then from that level, you gradually recovered back. Okay. So it was quite a clever thing. And you can see how the knowledge crossed from as I said, it came back originally from the Crusades and then to this. So, yes, there was a form of anaesthetic.
Yeah, so there was some pain relief.
Whether you survived the anaesthetic was all down to the mixture.
Right.
Because unfortunately, one of the things they didn't understand was that a plant grown in one side of this castle will have a different strength than a plant grown the other side. Because of the nutrients in the soil, it changes the strengths. Yeah.
Very good. So that's Prince Hal's story. I've got one other question, because right at the start of this recording, you mentioned it's been a miserable day weather-wise. It's not been very pleasant. Last time you were here with us, it was a lovely sunny day.
It was
How
glorious.
much difference does the weather make to archers?
It makes a big difference. It really does make a big difference. You get a nice day, not too much breeze, you're shooting as you want to do it, no problem at all. But as we saw at Towton, those guys were shooting in a freezing cold day. They were shooting in blizzard conditions, more or less blizzard conditions. And it would have made a real difference to them, the wind shear. But of course, archers also, because they trained so much in what they did, they got used to taking account of different wind conditions. But there becomes extremes. At the end of the day, some fighting at something like Towton would have been awful for any side because of those conditions. But they got used to certain ones, but there are extremes.
Having a chat about the weather seems like a nice note to end this discussion of archery on. Andy Rice, thank you very much for joining us once again on the Alnwick Castle podcast. Let's hope for sunshine next time you're here with us in 2024.
Let's hope so. I'm here again in July and in August, so hopefully then we will definitely get the sun.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, darling. Much obliged. Thank you.
If you'd like to see and hear from Andy in person, he'll be back in Alnwick Castle with his longbow demonstrations in July of 2024. Head to our website for all the details of his performances.
And if you want to have a go at archery yourself during your visit, please visit our archery lawn and our instructors will be happy to help you hit the target.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Alnwick Castle podcast. If you did, please give it a share and subscribe to the feed so you don't miss any future episodes.
Our next episode will be out in 2 weeks' time, but for now, I've been Daniel.
And I've been Deborah.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye.